And let's see. I think that's the main things that I wanted to cover, just kind of the background, but nuts and bolts of this. Um, in extension, we get calls from landowners pretty much year round. I'd say it's one of our strengths because we're connected to a wide range of people. We talk to farmers, we talk to landowners all the time. And we thought we can't do in-person meetings. Maybe this would be a way to provide you with some helpful information about knowing and understanding your farm, how things work. And then as you work with a farmer that you're renting or leasing land to, uh, gives you some background information. So, we start to learn to speak the same language. This evening, let's see, is Linda on yet? I don't see Linda yet. Okay. Linda was going to be our host and keep us on task and introducing all of our speakers. Not seeing her yet. I guess I'll take on that role. And this was put together by myself, as I said, Gene Schriefer. Josh Camps is the ag educator in Lafayette County. Wave, Josh. And there's Josh. Also, Joe Bonnell works in Iowa, Grant, Lafayette, and Greene County as a water education specialist, working on ground and surface water. We also organize this with the Land Conservation Department. So Linda Schweigert from Grant County, Todd Jensen in Greene County, and our very own Katie Abbott in Iowa County helped put all this together and kind of keep this on task. We've never done this before. We'd love to hear some feedback from you, things that we've covered, and maybe things that would be helpful to cover as we um, uh, think about maybe doing this again or whatever. Oh, there's Linda. And so, Linda, you just got on, and I just introduced all the people that helped plan this. So, do you want me to make you a co-host, Linda, or would you like to take over as moderator for this evening?
How about you make me co-host?
Okay. There we go. There you are. Okay, and you are now also a co-host.
Thank you.
So anytime you'd like to start introducing, I didn't know who was going to start off this evening. Oh, I forgot Dan Smith also helped us with this from the Nutrient Management Program at UW-Madison. There's Dan. Oh no, Dan doesn't have his. There we go. Joe goes first. Okay. So, Joe, do you want to start us out? And I think I gave you rights to do screen sharing if you need to.
And I'm ready to do that. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Gene. And I'm going to start us off, and I'm going to be given a real brief overview of agriculture and water quality in our region. And so you might wonder, why would we be talking about water quality and a series of presentations for landowners and farmers to talk about leases? Well, you probably already realize that farming practices do affect water quality and quantity, the quality and quantity of our groundwater, the quality and quantity of our surface water runoff. That's when the water runs over the surface of the land. And it also affects soil health and farmland productivity and wildlife. So there's a lot of important things that water does on our farms. And so we just want to get you thinking about, start you thinking about how water affects agriculture and agriculture affects water when you're thinking about leasing your land, or if you're a farmer, when you're thinking about renting land for agriculture. We also want to think about the downstream communities, because water runs downstream, and essentially we all live downstream of somebody. And so what happens upstream of us on the land is going to affect us and our community. And if you don't believe me, maybe you'll believe Luna Leopold, son of the famous Aldo Leopold, probably one of the most influential hydrologists in the country, if not the world, who was quoted as saying, "The health of our waters is the principal measure of how we live on the land. How we use the land, especially for agriculture, has a big impact on our water." So here's what I'm going to try to get through today in the next 8 minutes or so. I'm going to talk about both groundwater and surface water in our region, some of the factors that influence water quality, what we know about the quality of that water, and then implications. I want to talk about implications for both landowners and farmers. Then I'll have a summary and some final thoughts. So let's start with groundwater. If you've been in the southwest region of Wisconsin, you know that the geology is right there. Right under our feet is a lot of bedrock, and it's not far down to get to it. If you drive the highways, you're going to see a lot of that bedrock exposed. It's not far under the surface. So the major factors that make bedrock an important factor in groundwater is that it is fractured. It's primarily limestone, dolomite. There's also some layers of sandstone, but it is fractured. That means that water can easily pass vertically down through the bedrock into the water table. And we also know that there's generally not a lot of soil and subsoil above that bedrock. So water pretty quickly transfers down into the bedrock and down into the water table. The bedrock is, as we said, not far from the surface. This map just shows you the areas in Wisconsin where bedrock is less than 50 feet below, and in a lot of places in our region, it's less than 10. Or in that neighborhood. So you don't have to go far to get down to that bedrock, which means water percolating down through the soil is going to get quickly into the bedrock, quickly into the water table. So what do we know about groundwater quality? Well, one place to go would be University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point Center for Watershed Science and Education. They have a well water quality viewer. They've taken a lot of data that's been collected from folks who have collected water from their private wells and submitted it to laboratories. And that that data has been compiled, and you can see it on this water quality viewer. So let's take a look at one of those parameters that they have looked at. Atrazine. Here's a map of Southwest Wisconsin. Iowa County here, Grant and Lafayette. This shows the percentage of wells that have been tested, private wells, drinking water wells, that have been tested that have been positive for atrazine. So in these kind of pinkish, brownish areas, more than 50% or 50% or more of the wells that have been tested came back positive for atrazine. So there are a lot of wells, private wells, that have been contaminated by atrazine, which is a herbicide, which is commonly used, especially on corn acres, to control weeds. We won't go into the possible health effects of that, but I think everyone can agree we don't really want pesticides in our private wells and drinking water. Another place to look to understand what the quality of our groundwater is the SWIG study, which is the Southwest Wisconsin Groundwater and Geology Study. Again, people voluntarily submitted their drinking water from their private wells to be tested. And what they were looking for in this report was total coliform, E. coli, and high nitrates. They wanted to look for coliform to determine if there was potential contamination from either human feces or livestock feces. They didn't determine which one it was, but testing positive for coliform or E. coli indicates that there's likely contamination from either human waste or animal waste. There's a lot of numbers on here, so I want to really focus your attention on just two of them. So in November of 2018, 300 wells were tested, and 42% of those wells tested positive either for bacteria, coliform bacteria, or high nitrates. High nitrate meaning over 10 milligrams per liter, which is the point at which it's considered to be a health issue. In 2019, out of 539 wells tested, 27% came back positive for either coliform or nitrate, indicating we have some issues in our region with groundwater contamination. So what are some considerations for landowners and farmers in terms of groundwater protection? You should be monitoring your soil nutrient levels if you're going to be putting manure or fertilizers on your ground to make sure that you're not over applying. You want to monitor any drinking water wells to make sure that they have not become contaminated. If you're a landowner, you're going to want your farmer to have a nutrient management plan and be implementing that nutrient management plan to reduce the risk of groundwater contamination. And you want to maintain a buffer around your drinking water wells for sure. So let's talk quickly about surface water. Some of the factors affecting surface water quality in our region, well, we all know, again, if you've driven around the Southwest Wisconsin at all, you know it's very rolling. You're either going uphill or downhill typically. We're also seeing over time increasing storm intensities. That means we get more rain in a shorter period of time, and it tends to be concentrated in the spring and the fall, which is times when we're applying fertilizers and when the ground tends to be bare. So that's an issue too. Also, our soils in this region are pretty erodible. Here's a map from the Natural Resource Conservation Service showing average soil losses from cropland, and I've highlighted this area in Southwest Wisconsin. The red areas show 8 or more tons of soil per acre per year that are eroding, and then the other kind of orangish region there is between 5 and 8 tons per acre lost per year to erosion. So we do have a big issue with soil loss from our cropland. Another area or another factor, of course, is land use. What are we doing on the land? What you do on the land is going to have a big impact on what your surface water looks like, because the surface water is going to run over that land and pick up any loose contaminants, including soil, and carry it to the nearest ditch, river, stream, or lake. And it's no surprise to anybody, I'm sure, on this call that agriculture is the dominant land use in Southwest Wisconsin. All of the greenish and yellowish areas on this map are agricultural land. So it clearly predominates the landscape. And with all that agriculture, you've got a lot of livestock. If you don't manage your livestock appropriately, you can have soil erosion in your stream banks. You can have livestock defecating in your streams. When it rains, that mud and manure is going to be carried directly down into our streams. Obviously, when you have a lot of livestock, you produce a lot of manure, and that manure has to go somewhere. Most of it goes onto the landscape, and we need to be careful about how we manage it. Manure on the landscape is not a bad thing. It's a great soil nutrient, but it's obviously got to be applied appropriately and managed appropriately. We also have a lot of cropland. There's still a lot of tillage going on. There's a lot of commercial fertilizers that are applied. All that increases the risk of sediment getting into our streams and nutrients getting into our streams and groundwater. And especially when you have sloping land, which we mostly do in Southwest Wisconsin, and you have heavy rainfalls and you have unprotected land that doesn't have plants on it, then you've got a high risk of erosion. So what's all this mean for water quality? What do we know about water quality in Southwest Wisconsin, our surface waters? Well, every year the Department of Natural Resources goes out and they monitor streams and rivers. And over time, they get a picture for the quality of water in those rivers and streams. What you're seeing here is all those green lines are streams that have been monitored in our area that have been determined to be meeting water quality standards. The red squiggly lines are those streams and rivers that are not meeting water quality standards. In other words, they're considered to be impaired streams. So this kind of gives you a sense of the miles of streams that are attaining water quality standards and those that are not. What's the cause of the non-attainment? Well, primarily in Wisconsin, it is phosphorus. That is the major cause for streams not being in attainment. Phosphorus can come from multiple sources, including wastewater treatment plants. But of course, in our region, a lot of the phosphorus is probably coming from agricultural land. We also have sediment. The soil that erodes off the land gets into the streams and causes sedimentation. That's another big reason why some of our streams aren't in attainment. Bacteria is another one, which can, of course, come from livestock manure. Not all of it does, but some portion of it does. So what are some considerations in terms of surface water? Again, I would go back to nutrient management plans. If you're a landowner and you're renting your land out, make sure that your farmer has a nutrient management plan. They know what's in that plan and they're implementing that plan. If you have sloping ground, which if you own land in this region of the state, you probably do. Ideally, if you can have perennial cover over the steeper slopes, that's great. If not, at least try to have a living cover on it as often as you can, which may include cover crops. And aside from that, if you can't do that, or in addition to that, you could also make sure your farmer is leaving some crop residue, which helps to cover the soil and prevent erosion. We also encourage no-till or reduced tillage over traditional conventional tillage to reduce the disturbance of the soil. If your farmer is grazing livestock, we encourage managed grazing, which means that you're moving the livestock around and making sure that they're not overgrazing and denuding the soil. And then along your streams and anywhere where there's a concentrated flow in a ditch or a low area that's gathering a lot of runoff, we encourage folks to exclude livestock from streams in particular, if possible. If not, put in stream crossings so that the livestock are less likely to linger in the streams. And we certainly encourage buffer strips along streams to prevent that soil erosion from getting into the stream itself. So, final thoughts. we all know that stewardship of the land and water resources is a shared responsibility of the landowner and the farmer. We encourage the landowner to know the land that you're renting out. What are the risks on your property to contaminating groundwater and surface water? And then talk to a conservation professional about what are your options for reducing the risk of contaminating ground and surface water. And with that, I'll end and turn it back over to Linda.
Thanks, Joe. While we're getting ready for Josh, I did have a question come through. I'm curious about the impact of legacy nutrients on water quality measures.
Yeah, that is a concern. I would say as far as legacy nutrients, probably where that is most important is with phosphorus that is attached to soil that is settled in streams and lakes. If you remove a source of nutrient from, say, groundwater, generally over time that water is going to become clean. But sediments in the bottoms of rivers, lakes, and streams that contains phosphorus, it can be more of a long-term problem.
Thanks, Joe. And next up, we have Understanding Your Farmland's Value by Understanding Your Soil's Value from Josh Camps, Extension Lafayette County.
Thanks, Linda, for the introduction. Thanks, Joe, for the first part of our presentation tonight. And thank you all for sharing your time with us tonight as we go ahead and talk about some of these important shared land resources. Got a few ideas here for us to talk about, kind of building into Dan's presentation next, and then also our Wednesday and our following Monday meeting as well. So farmland value and soil value. We get a lot of questions like Gene mentioned, what is the value of my farm to rent? Or what might be the value of my farm if I wanted to sell that farm? It really has to come back to the value of that soil. And as a landowner and as a farmer, the value of that soil, there are some inherent characteristics that make up what the potential might be of the soil, but there's also quite a few different things to look at to increase the value of the soil. So I have a couple of soil profile pictures up here now on the screen. And if you haven't been able to see below the soil surface, I would encourage you to do so. I was a soil judger in high school, college, and find a lot of peace when you're in the ground, actually. So as long as you can get out, right? But so we can really learn a lot about the health of our soil, about the ability of the soil to produce crops and to resist erosion when we can take a look at the soil. Not always the case, not always, have access, to looking at our soil in this way. So we'll take a look in just a few minutes about some tools that are out there that we can get an idea of our soil quality on our whole farm and our whole land without having to, do all those separate soil pit studies. So we talk about land rental values and ag leases. Why? That's kind of the topic of our series here. And I think one of the main reasons is about half of the land in the state of Wisconsin is rented. So that means that there's a landowner, right? And then a farmer or a tenant. So they have a shared interest in that land. And we're trying to encourage that conversation and how can that land resource be managed best for profitability, but also for just the long-term quality of the soil. So I have a challenge and an opportunity here. Just wanted to share quickly that challenge. How can we identify that equitable rental value for both farmers and landowners while practicing land stewardship? Okay, so it has to work on both sides, right? There's a return on investment. There is expenses that are incurred by both parties. And also, if we're going to bring this third piece into it, understanding our farmland and understanding the value of our land, it's definitely important to have some of those conversations as well. So with that, we have this opportunity, right, to improve quality, productivity, and resilience. So different words that can be described, I guess, differently by others, but building that long-term value in our soils, understanding our soils, that they're not just a medium out there to put our seeds in and hope for the best, but really they're a living part of our farmland. So a few tools here I just want to highlight on, and we are going to take just a little bit of a deeper look into the web soil survey. All right, so here's a few tools that I use for my extension work if I get some questions about what my farmland might be worth, the value. So there's a NAS survey, and this is just a simple survey of what land is being rented for by county throughout the whole state of Wisconsin. We'll take a look at that. You can kind of see that's kind of a baseline to know possibly where to start when you're talking about the value of your farmland. And then the soil survey is the one we're going to take a look at, where we can go out and measure all of those separate soils within our farmland, just by working here in our office. Someone has already done that work. They've already dug those soil profiles and evaluated that, so we can reap the benefits of that work. And nutrient management planning really is a great opportunity for a landlord and a tenant to do that routine soil testing, have some conversations about the levels, about the organic matter. It really is a chance to take a look at some of those practices that Joe mentioned. Are we seeing some improvement? Are we seeing some more organic matter improvement? How are the nutrient levels within our soil? Just a great chance to have that conversation. And then finally, this last piece is a little bit more open. This farmland stewardship really is that land ethic, right? We're doing all these things for that purpose and that value of taking care of our land. Just a couple little points here that I have on this slide. It really comes down to the two parties that are going to make that agreement, right? If this land rental is an equitable agreement. And just a little tad bit that I have at the bottom. We'll talk about that as we go into our series about this concept of long-term rental contracts and how it can really give the opportunity to increase our soil health practices, nutrient management, and some of our tillage and planting technologies. All right, so we're thinking about nutrients and taking care of them and putting them where the crop can use them. All that takes investment, and a little bit longer lease might help with that. So here's that NAS survey. Hopefully you can see it actually came up pretty good. I pulled off our 4 counties. I say our, that's the group here that's working on this. I pulled off our 4 counties and put them on both sides, but this is 2019 data. This comes out every 2 years in the fall. So this is a baseline. This is an average. There's land that's rented above this and below this. But when we talk about value in our cropland and we're renting it, it really comes down to, what are we able to ask for that land for rent is kind of the starting point of the conversation. So here's a tool that's available. If you haven't used it before, go ahead and check it out. This next one that I mentioned, and don't get a kink in your neck here, but I turned it sideways so we could see it just a little bit better. So this is that soil survey, and I have a picture down here at the very bottom, Lafayette County's soil survey. So this on the ground work was done, I believe it was in 1966. All right, and these boundaries were all created. This is actually a 180-acre farm here that sits right behind my house. So I'm about right here at the moment. So all that work was done in our soil survey. The surveyors laid these lines in, all right, as they go across our hillsides and our bottom ground, and they've identified different soil series. Okay, so all the soil within this area right here has the same characteristics. It has the same water holding capacity. It has the same nutrient holding capacity. So that gives us the opportunity to kind of understand how many acres of that soil we have on a certain farm and how the management of that soil might differ from a different soil. So this particular farm has a lot of TAMA, that's the TA. AS is Ashdale, okay? So it has a few of those different kinds of soils, but they usually fit into the landscape in a pretty similar fashion. So this type of information is what we're going to be able to find on the web soil survey when we get to that. Nutrient management planning, I'm not going to talk a lot about that besides the fact that soil testing is really, really important. Okay, it's the foundation. Whether you're looking at the nutrients that you're putting into your farm or the nutrients that a tenant are adding to your farm, it really comes down to profitability and comes down to how we're managing our land. And we don't know unless we have that soil test to start with. All right. This book is available. It's called A2809. So if you have a soil test result, you can go to this book and it'll give you the recommended nutrient rates for the upcoming crop. All right. It gives you all the information that's found in the Snap Plus software. So if you don't have the Snap Plus software, but you're still interested, in nutrient recommendations, nutrient rates, this book will have all of that for you. And this last piece, I'm just going to touch on this briefly. On Wednesday, Jamie Patton's going to take us down the path of, understanding soil health and understanding what soil function is on our farms. But this farmland stewardship concept, if you take a look at the right-hand side, talks about some of those things that Joe mentioned, right? Some of those things that soil require to be healthy, and soil requires to go through the correct nutrient cycles that it goes through. All these normal functions that soil wants to do for us, if we can allow it to happen. All right. So those are kind of captured within that graph to just show how all those different pieces come together. But I really think it starts with this first one right here. If we aren't able to find measures and ways to reduce soil erosion and reduce water runoff on our farms, these other pieces don't really matter. Okay, this valuable resource, the soil resource that's on our farms, we've got to it's got to be able to stay on our farm so it can go through some of these soil health improvement measures. And that is that area. Reduce nutrient leaching. So how can our soils store the nutrients that we need? How can we feed our crops at times when the crop is more ready to take that nutrient up? And this farmland resiliency, I'm not going to try to define that. That can mean a lot of different things, but it is that concept of, can my land take that stress? Can my land take the 20-year rain that we maybe are getting a little more often? What practices do I have in place, or does my tenant have in place, so that my farmland is resilient? Okay, so fill in whatever you want in that category, but I think it's kind of a cool thing to think about. Just a few references, and then thank you and questions, and I'm just going to keep going here. We'll pull up the web soil survey and we'll take a look. But if you do have any questions, by all means. All right, so here's the web soil survey. Let me go. Well, anyway, I should go back, but here's what we're gonna do. I just typed in an address. We should go back. There we go. So here is the web soil survey. And we will share some of these materials at the end of our series. I'll have a step-by-step guide, if this is something you want to look at on your farm, how to get in here and kind of some different things to work on. So don't worry too much about taking notes and knowing all the correct buttons and what to push next. But we're going to start with this green button right here. And I believe something like 95% of the soils in the United States are mapped within this NRCS program. Okay, here is a farm that I've identified. Here is the boundaries of this farm. So, and I just typed in Center Drive Road, Belmont, Wisconsin. All right, so you don't need to be, spot on. You don't need a GPS coordinate. If you have like a mailing address, that'll get you pretty close. But once you get to this area, we have some tools up here we can use. I'm going to hit the zoom out. So I don't know if you've been into like the parcel viewer at all. Some counties have a parcel viewer. Some of these same tools are present in this web soil survey. So then I'm hitting the hand here. Okay, so we can move this around. So now we're looking at, this is basically, well, this would be a section right here. So this is a big section, I guess is what I'll call it for lack of a better term. It's a section without a road through it, all right? So this is the farm that we found with just a simple address. And let's take a look at it. I'm just going to zoom back in, I hope. Okay. So up on the top here is the toolbar where we have some of these different options. So what we need to do for this program is identify the area that we would like the program to pull that soil survey data from. So I'm going to use this area of interest tab here. I'm going to click on that and outline this farm. Okay, so I'm just using my mouse, clicking once when I get to the corners where I want to make my boundaries. Okay, when I get to the end, I'm going to double click, and that's going to make an area of interest for me. Really speedy tonight. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay, and if you look over here on the left-hand side, this shows how many acres I highlighted. Okay, 149 acres. So that's our area of interest. That's this first tab right up here. So I'd like to see a soil map. So let's go to that next. It's going to take that same area of interest and it's going to lay that soil map over that for us. Let me go to this function. So we can take a look at a little smaller. We can take a look at this farm, okay, and some of the crop fields on this farm, maybe some of the pasture that is there. And then what I think is a really neat function of this, we're thinking about the value of our farms, maybe the rental value. Over here on the left-hand side, it has it split up for you. Okay, so this Ashdale silt loam is a good prime farmland soil. 50% of the farm meets that. Okay, Dodgeville silt loam perhaps isn't maybe quite as productive of a soil, but has a little bit less of a percentage, and just the same on down through here. So that really gives us a picture. We can kind of add those up, maybe do a little bit of math to understand that, what percentage of my farm is prime farmland, and then maybe we can go back to that NASS soil or that NASS survey and, have a little bit of are we above average, below average, are we average? Okay, and if we want to take that just a little farther, let's go to this Soil Data Explorer. Okay, so our same area of interest is in there. Okay, and now we have all kinds of different things to take a look at. So I'm going to go to land classifications. I type that in, and I want to know what farmland classification is. Just kind of a general tool that will tell us, what is the capacity of this piece of land for farmland. So if you're kind of following my clicks there, I'm going to go to view the rating. Okay, so there it laid out all of our soil series, but they're colored. Okay. So the green is a higher productive land, and the blue is a little bit less productive land. And really what that means in this landscape is the blue has a little more slope to it, a little less water holding capacity. Maybe it's been subjected to soil erosion over the years. so just not quite as productive. Okay, so if you look down through here, all these soils are really excellent, aren't they? But then you get to some of these soils that we've already talked about, prime farmland. Okay, and if you enjoy a good cut of meat, you know that prime is the best, correct? So same thing with the farmland. This is another tool, okay, to take a look. Well, what percentage, you know, of my farm is prime farmland? Add these up, okay? So some of these tools, when we're taking a look at what the value of our land is, you know, think about them as what the value is for the resource and the soil quality, but also you can think on what is the value compared to maybe what a fair rental rate would be. And I think there's a lot of other things we can do on here, but that's what I wanted to kind of share tonight. And I'm going to leave some time for Dan, and while he's checking over and getting ready, I will see if there are any questions.
I don't have any questions in the chat right now, Josh. Thank you. So
You're
now
welcome.
we have Dan Smith, UW Extension. He's going to be speaking to us on soil fertility and management.
Thanks, Linda. Thanks, Josh, for the great setup to this presentation tonight. So I'm going to cover the soil fertility management aspects of the nutrient management plan. So a core component of what Joe and Josh were talking about, a nutrient management plan, is the soil fertility component. And soil fertility really affects a lot of things on our farm. It's going to affect production, and it's going to affect potential pool of farmers that be interested in renting this land. It's going to impact return on investment. So it's going to impact the quality and quantity of crops that we can grow, anything from pasture to corn grain to soybeans to alfalfa. Photo here shows differences soil fertility can make in yield. Big driving factor of yield in Southwest Wisconsin is soil fertility management. Photo from Josh Camps this summer shows some impacts of soil fertility management on corn, different strips for different manure application rates and different applications of nitrogen. And then it affects our neighbors to the south in the Mississippi River watershed system. A lot of our nutrients and soil have the potential to migrate into that watershed and flow all the way down to the Gulf. So it's going to affect these farmers in the Gulf and the quality and quantity of seafood they can harvest. So the cornerstone of nutrient management planning is a soil test. And the soil test is a report card. It's how well you've done managing your soil fertility, and it gives us recommendations on what we need to do. So for $8, it's a great investment. $8 for 5 acres of land. So it works out to be about 40 cents per acre, because we only recommend a soil test every 4 years. And this would be something that most farmers and their agronomists would be working together on to do. A lot of folks in Southwest Wisconsin hire out a service to do this for them. It's also possible to do this yourself. And those prices varied if you hired it out versus if you do it yourself, of course. So the soil test report gives us a report card of how well we've done managing these nutrients on our farm. And this is the very bottom of that report, not to get bogged down in the technical details of the report. And this is what we need to grow crops. These are different levels of nutrients. So our soil test gives us phosphorus and potassium and our soil pH. It also reports organic matter. So our phosphorus for this particular farm is represented by these P's, and there's levels of soil phosphorus: very low, low, optimum, high, and very high. We want to be in the optimum range for our P and our K, our phosphorus and potassium. Anything on this end of the spectrum, we want to go ahead and try and add to that system to build up to optimum. Anything on this side of the spectrum, we want to try and draw that down. This is a very important concept to think about when you're looking at what your farm's at. If you're in a rental system or thinking about renting out your land, is managing to optimum. I've heard more than one absentee landowner say, well, I left my farm with very high soil phosphorus, very high soil potassium levels. I really want that to be managed at that level. And the truth of that is it's not sustainable to manage at the high or very high level. That's why the university has recommendations that say an optimum level for crop production. So for a baseline recommendation, I would suggest looking for that optimum range if you're ever interpreting soil test data. There's a couple different thoughts among soil test data that we can think about. We can think about building or maintaining these levels. We want to maintain that optimum range, and we're going to build to that optimum range and maintain that with our crop production practices. We're going to do this through the additions of manure, commercial fertilizer, and routine testing to see how we're doing. The other portion to point out, soil pH. We don't see a lot of low soil pHs in Southwest Wisconsin, typically because of our parent material, but it is possible to have low soil pH, and this drastically affects especially forage production. Alfalfa is very sensitive to low soil pH. So we want to keep an eye on that. And our organic matter is really the life of the soil. It's very important to have good organic matter and to manage for good organic matter. And more will be talked about next week in Jamie Patton's presentation on soil health on the importance of organic matter. Soil test categories. How much fertilizer should we be recommending for these fields? At that optimum range, we're going to recommend applying to crop removal levels. So that means the crop's going to harvest nutrients from our farm. So we want to supplement those nutrients back onto the landscape with manure, with commercial fertilizers, that type of thing. That way we maintain that optimum range. If we're at some of these other categories, we want to remove that soil fertility from our system. That way we reduce our risk. Soil test phosphorus changes very slowly. Very quick example. I don't want to get too tied down in the numbers of this system. If we have a soil test phosphorus range of 75 parts per million and excessively high, so the very far right side of that spectrum, high on our report card, typical crop rotation in southern Wisconsin over a period of 6 years, we remove 345 pounds of phosphorus. P2O5 is the plant available phosphorus from our system. That means our soil test phosphorus level is still 56 parts per million, which is still in that excessively high, higher than optimum range after 6 years. That's because we see that phosphorus removes about 6 to 7 parts per million per year per acre, based on our common crops in Southwest Wisconsin: corn, corn silage, oats, and then hay in our rotation. Soil test potassium changes very quickly though. That same 6-year rotation, corn followed by a forage of oats, seeding ear, and hay, we see over 1,000 pounds of potassium removed from that farm. That's huge. That's a lot of potassium leaving that acre of soil. So we go from excessively high at 200 parts per million to 56 parts per million in 6 years. This is an economic factor to think about. So if you're renting out your land and the producer's not adding the proper amounts of fertilizer to the land, this can very quickly deplete the value of that land because this takes a while to build back up. If you're not fertilizing to crop removal levels in those low, very low categories, it can take a little while and it can take quite the investment to bring these levels back up. More specific questions, be glad to answer one-on-one based on soil test data or crop management. Nitrogen's a little bit different. Joe talked a lot about nitrogen. He introduced the topic very well on why we should be very concerned about nitrogen management. In Wisconsin and really the upper Midwest, we use a system called MRTN, which is looking at the corn price and nitrogen price. Has nothing to do with corn yield. That's a very important note. We're talking about soil yield potential. We're talking about soil texture, so sands versus others. Talking about the previous crops such as soybeans, and we're talking about irrigation for our nitrogen recommendations. Very quick example here. If nitrogen is $350 a ton, we buy nitrogen by the ton. Typical in southern Wisconsin, we use urea. We also use maybe some liquid forms of nitrogen such as 28 and 32%. Common names, 2,000 pounds, 46% of that ton of urea is actual nitrogen. So we get 920 pounds of actual nitrogen. We take that price of $350 a ton divided by 920 pounds. We get 38 cents per pound for our nitrogen price. Our grain price a few months ago already was $3.15 at Mineral Point. So we do the math on that and we get a nitrogen to corn price ratio of 0.12. Not real important right now, but we can go and look at a chart and that's going to tell us what our actual nitrogen rate is. So I'd talk to your renter briefly about nitrogen management, why it's important. And ask them if they're using a nitrogen to corn price ratio approach. And if not, feel free to reach out to someone in Southern Wisconsin's extension and land conservation programs for a little bit more help on that. This is a very basic approach for medium and fine textured soils. There's a lot more adjustments and requirements for no-till systems, nitrogen credits such as manure applications we'll talk about in the next slide, that type of thing. So we typically see 165-pound application rate as being best for this particular region, but it can be 155 to 180 pounds per acre. Manure applications really should be planned. So this is a way to really increase the economic value of your farm and the value to renters, is having land that they can spread manure on, having the soil test data saying that this land could use manure, and having an appropriate application strategy for the time of year and the types of land that are available. Now I'm talking about mechanical applications of manure here. Also grazing applications of manure, a great way to get manure on the landscape. Couple things to think about. We should know our rate of manure application. So this was from a few years ago. Linda hosted a class at Lancaster Agricultural Research Station where we calibrated a manure spreader. So we weighed that manure spreader to find out how much manure we were applying per acre. So that's a manure spreader out there applying manure to the field. We typically see a 5 to 7 ton manure application rate in Southwest Wisconsin. For liquid manure, we can see anywhere from 6,000 all the way up to 18,000 gallons of liquid manure per acre. This is an example of a liquid manure application, really cool photo from Google Maps from this fall. Manure application being made across the landscape there, across this nice flat field. Very even application. That's what we should be looking at. We want to treat manure like fertilizer. We don't want to abuse it. We don't want to spread it unevenly across the field. We want to have a plan on where that goes. A lot of new technology in manure application. There's low disturbance manure application equipment. There's more specialized equipment for handling composted manure, that type of thing. So the soil test gives us the foundation. It tells us how much manure we should apply. And then we can calibrate that manure spreader, that manure application equipment based on the livestock species on these farms to get a actual manure application rate. And of course, we can test that manure and we can find out its exact nutrient analysis. We typically use a book value for how much nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium is available in that manure. All right, so poor soil conservation could be reducing your net worth. That's a pretty startling tagline, I guess, a title for the slide, but it's true. If there's a lot of erosion occurring, I believe Josh had a good photo, or maybe it was Joe from Discovery Farms, of the erosion from a farm. This is the money leaving the landscape. So this is your nutrients, this is your organic matter, this is your yield potential leaving the soil, leaving your farm, moving into the water, moving into the neighbor's field, perhaps. That's not to say that all tillage is bad, but tillage should be done with a goal and a purpose. If we're doing recreational tillage, I like to say, not an original term by any means, that's unnecessary and doesn't have a goal or purpose. Targeted tillage for weed control, for heavy residue management, maybe some manure management practices. There is a time and place, and there's a land for tillage. If we're having C and D and E slopes, we really want to focus on reducing the amount of tillage those slopes see, and we want to try to go into longer no-till systems and forage systems to avoid that soil movement. We're on relatively flat soils, very southwestern Wisconsin, southern Grant County, some of those flatter farms. That's where we start to see tillage be utilized a little bit more in southern Wisconsin, but again, that risk still exists for soil movement off the farm. So what does that actually look like? So Josh had a really good photo of the soil profile in his slide. And we're farming that top 6 inches of topsoil. That's where our money is made. That's where money's lost on our agricultural systems. That's what holds our nutrients. That's what cycles our nutrients. That's where our organic matter is made. So we really don't want to lose that. We want to hold on to that. That 6 inches of soil is what we're soil sampling every year. Now we know that the roots of our crops grow down 48 inches, 60 inches down into the deeper horizons of soil to utilize nutrients and cycle nutrients and to reach for water. But that top 6 inches is really important to our crop production system. So if we lose that, we're not going to be able to get that back, typically in our lifetimes even. It's going to take a very long time for that soil to form again. Looking at different crops and their effect on how the soil can be moved, we have a pasture grazing system. This is a soil runoff simulator. So there was a simulated rain applied to these plots. these little slabs of soil, and then the water ran off. So I don't remember how much water was applied to these, but it'd be similar to a common rainstorm we'd see in Southwest Wisconsin. Perennial system here, very little water in the cup, simulating very little ran off, quite a bit soaked in. Poorly managed pasture, so you can see that grass is very short, quite a bit of water ran off. A cover crop, really nice stand of cover crop after maybe a wheat crop, very little water ran off, most of it soaked in. A no-till system, quite a bit of that water soaked in, and then a conventional till, quite a bit of that water ran off. So we see that soil really interacting differently to those living roots and those different higher residue systems. And those higher residue systems are able to hold our soil in place and protect our our investment and our net worth. So finally, to wrap things up, how do we protect this asset that we have? Nutrient management should really be a core of any lease agreement. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a very rigorous process, nutrient management. It may already be done. That may be something you just need to talk to your tenant about and find out a little bit more. Soil conservation is going to be very important. Again, this might be something that you're already doing, just something maybe the farmer's aware of, and maybe just a brief conversation about might reassure everyone that it's being done on the farm. Soil testing goes hand in hand with nutrient management. And then finally, crop rotation and diversification. You can see this photo here. This is from the Lancaster area, that diversification of the crops across the landscape, the contour strips. We have maybe some soybeans, alfalfa, and corn and terraces up and down that field. We're seeing more and more of these terraces be removed to be able to farm this with a 24-row planter and a 120-foot spray boom on our larger equipment. But those terraces are really important to protecting your asset. Finding a producer who's willing to farm those terraces may be a very good investment for the long run. So that's it.
Thanks, Dan. I have a question. How do I know if my renter is putting too much manure on my field?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we'd want to start to look at our nutrient management plan. If there's no nutrient management plan, we'd want to look at the soil test levels. So we're managing for phosphorus in Wisconsin. So we want to apply to the recommended phosphorus levels for the crops being grown in that crop rotation. Managing for nitrogen, that's more common in Iowa and Illinois. That's going to mean that our phosphorus levels are higher than desired, and it's going to be a little bit more risky, and we're going to lose potentially phosphorus into our system, from our system. So I'd recommend looking at the soil test. I'd also looking at the species of livestock and the application rates that are being made to that field.
So those are all the questions I had in the chat box. I think because we have such a small group, if anyone is wishing to ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question of any three of the presenters that we have here tonight.
Dean, did you have the poll ready?
I do. Should we do the poll and give people a chance to think of a question?
Sure.
Okay, let me launch the poll. And then we'll do a little homage to Alex Trebek.
Hard to believe he was 80-some, I think, 18, something like that. He was much older than I thought he was.
Okay. We're going to give that, we'll give it a little bit over a minute here, and then we're going to close that poll. And I'll have all these results recorded, and then we'll talk again between the planning group and think about how we could improve Wednesday's presentation and next Mondays too. So we do like to hear from our participants so we can refine what we're doing because this is our first time doing it and we'd like to be better if we can. So I'm going to shut that down. And these were the results from those that voted this evening. Okay, so did we have any additional questions come in, Linda?
I have no additional questions in the chat box.
Okay, and what's our topic for Wednesday night? Oh, I put you on the spot.
Nope, that's okay. For Wednesday, we have soil health, conservation practices, nutrient management plans, and manure management basics, talking about statewide performance standards and programs that go along with that. We encourage everyone, even if you didn't register for that evening, the link that you were given tonight will work for that night. So feel free to come to all 3 of the webinars that we have going on.
Okay, and if you do have other feedback for us, please contact myself, Josh, Linda, Dan, or Katie, and let us know what else we can do that might help you better understand your farm. And
Thank
if
you,
that's
everybody.
all, then
Thank you.
we'll shut off and let everybody go have a late dinner if you haven't had it already. Thanks a lot.
Good night.
Night, everybody.